Have you ever discovered a detail in a theme park and thought, there's gotta be a story behind that? Well, you've come to the right place. We're Amanda, Kevin, and Kim, the team behind We're in the Park, and we've spent years exploring theme parks and finding the details that most people miss. Now, we're diving into the history, stories, and secrets behind those magical details. So grab your curiosity, and maybe even a churro, and let's explore the parks together, one detail at a time.
Hello and welcome to the Where in the Park podcast. This is Kevin, and on this episode, I will be sharing the history of how we got those scary nighttime Halloween events at theme parks. Here in North America, the main events include Knott's Scary Farm, Universal Halloween Horror Nights, Cedar Fair's Halloween Haunts, Halloweekends, and Scarowinds, Six Flags Fright Fests, and United Parks Howl-O-Screams. Legoland parks have held their Brick or Treat event since 2001, but there's something different. Also, Disney does have after-hours Halloween events at their parks as well, but they're not the type of event I'm covering today. Don't worry though, we'll be going over Disney's events on next week's episode. Before I continue, I do want to warn anyone listening that this episode will include a few references to horror-related content, and it will also include tragic stories that include real deaths that have happened at theme parks. If you are not interested in hearing about those tragedies, we will warn you as they're coming up, but their occurrences did alter the course of these types of events and the safety protocols now in place, so I feel that they are worth learning about. Now, humans being fans of fear isn't anything new. If you look up the origins of haunted houses and mazes at theme parks, you can go pretty far down the rabbit hole. Whether we're talking about the first horror novel, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, published in 1764, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum's edition of the, quote, separate room back in 1846, which was later coined the Chamber of Horrors, the first horror movie, a 2-minute long film from 1896 by George Millet, Le Manoir du Diable, also known as The Haunted Castle or The House of the Devil. There was also Grand Guignol that opened the following year, which was a theater specializing in onstage horror that opened in 1897. Luna Park at Coney Island's 1905 Dragon's Gorge, the first of many haunted rides at amusement parks, or 1915's Orton and Spooner's Ghost House in Liphook, England, aka Haunted Cottage, which is understood to be the world's oldest haunted house walkthrough attraction. That walkthrough is also said to be the first time up-close humans in costumes were part of the scare. There's also 1920's The Cabinet de Caligari, which is considered the first feature-length horror movie. And then in 1930, there was the first midnight ghost show, Elwyn's Midnight Spook Party. These were traveling shows held at movie theaters that combined live performances and horror movies. Each of these can be pointed to as part of the origin of today's theme park spooky season events in their own way, but you may have noticed that Halloween itself wasn't really an inspiration for any of them. I could easily spend an hour or two going over the history of Halloween right now, but I'm not going to do that. So let's just say that today's celebration on October 31st may have started with a Celtic harvest festival named Samhain, and it became All Hallows Eve when the Catholic Church moved All Hallows Day, also known as All Saints Day, from May 13th to November 1st, sometime between the 8th and 9th centuries, arguably to align with the Celtic celebrations soon after Romans conquered some of the ancient Celtic realms. Either way, each of these traditions focused on celebrating or at least acknowledging the dead, but the holiday, for the most part, was only recognized in Celtic regions of Ireland and Scotland. Celebrating the eve of All Hallows Day wasn't really a thing in the United States until after the Great Famine of 1845, sometimes called the Irish Potato Famine, in which around 1 million Irish and Scottish people emigrated to the United States. It would take some time, but eventually ideas for what Halloween could be started to take hold. It transformed from a night of respect and/or fear of the dead, to a night for adults to drink and party, to a night for young boys to pull pranks, to a night for children to dress in costumes and have fun. It took about 100 years, but around when World War II ended in 1945, Halloween had become a nationwide American secular tradition, with children across the country dressing up and trick-or-treating regardless of their religion or national origin. The way the ideas for how to celebrate Halloween originally spread were by books, news articles, and postcards. But it wasn't until the inventions and widespread adoption of telephones, radios, and televisions that the holiday really took hold. In fact, television is likely the reason why monsters are associated with Halloween at all. In October 1957, Shock Theater began airing weekly on televisions across the country, introducing many people to classic Universal Studios horror films. They featured unique costumed horror hosts, depending on where in the country you were watching from, and they became kind of a phenomenon, resulting in many people dressing up in costumes as those classic monsters for Halloween. Around this time, many local charities would also have spook houses at festivals or carnivals, normally the week of or before Halloween, mostly as a way to prevent kids from pulling pranks, but also to make money for those charities. According to Ted Doherty, the author of the book History of Knott's Scary Farm, JC's had been creating haunted houses since 1939, with houses being run in California during Halloween as early as the 1940s. He also explains that another group named Campus Life began building haunted houses in 1968, with a house operating in Long Beach in 1970. By 1972, there were around 100 haunted houses in major cities in the country run by Campus Life. It's also worth noting that in 1965, Hollywood Wax Museum opened on Hollywood Boulevard with its own Chamber of Horrors inspired by Madame Tussauds, but it featured the recently popularized movie monsters, mostly from Universal Studios. From our research, the first recorded Halloween celebration in a theme park was in 1959, when the original Disneyland in Anaheim held a small event on the Saturday of Halloween that year. But like I said, we'll be covering more about Disney and Halloween in next week's episode. Now, just for the timeline of it all, I do also want to point out that on August 9th, 1969, Disneyland opened the Haunted Mansion. It wasn't marketed as a Halloween attraction, but it definitely set the bar for what a spooky attraction at a theme park could be. Okay, remember a few sentences ago when I mentioned that shock theater was popular? Well, it inspired other TV stations to start their own versions of late-night horror movies hosted by costumed spooky characters. On October 3rd, 1970, a local station in the Los Angeles area premiered their program, Fright Night, hosted by the character Sinister Seymour, portrayed by actor Larry Vincent. On Halloween Day in 1971, Sinister Seymour hosted a meet and greet at Universal Studios, where he also gave out the prize for the costume contest being held in the park. At the time, Universal didn't have a theater that Seymour would be able to perform a show in, so it was just a photo op. In September 1972, Gary Blair, the agent of Seymour, contacted Bill Hollingshead, the head of Knott's Berry Farm's entertainment department, making him the person in charge of talent at the park. Blair asked if it would be possible to have Seymour do a version of his show in their new, at the time, John Wayne Theater, currently the Walter Knott's Theater, for Halloween. Hollingshead told him a month wasn't long enough to prepare for a Halloween event and that he should contact them again in the spring of the following year. Seymour instead hosted a Halloween spooktacular show at Magic Mountain in Valencia, California that year. This was likely the first Halloween-themed show to occur inside a theme park, but it wasn't considered a success. A likely reason for it being unsuccessful was that this Scream-based show took place in an outdoor theater at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. I should point out that the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World screened The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and gave out tickets for free rides on the Haunted Mansion to kids that same weekend before Halloween in 1972, as they celebrated, quote, Halloween weekend. It was definitely a promotion, but not necessarily an event. But anyway, Seymour's agent took Knott's up on their request to call them back in the spring, and according to Knott's historians, it was Walter Knott who decided to go forward with a 3-day Halloween event that Friday through Sunday before Halloween in 1973, even though the rest of the family did not think it was a good idea. Unlike Magic Mountain, Knott used Seymour as the headliner for an event with a separate ticket, running from 6 p.m. to midnight the Friday and Saturday before Halloween, and sometime on Sunday. That history is a little lost, so if you know, please let us know. This event, the very first Halloween haunt, more commonly known as Knott's Scary Farm these days, was planned by Martha Boyd and George Condos from the Knott's Berry Farm marketing department, fresh off designing the walk-around character Whittles a few months earlier, along with Bill Hollingshead and Gary Salisbury. This event included the first theme park haunted maze when they transformed the Haunted Shack attraction into the Monster Maze. The Calico Mine Ride and Timber Mountain Log Ride were also decorated for Halloween, and the ride's creator, Bud Hurlbut, scared riders while wearing a gorilla costume for some reason. For the most part, there were some fog machines, but there weren't many monsters roaming around Ghost Town that first year. But the park's Peekins, which normally had static figures inside, now had live actors as monsters inside for the event. Of course, today Knott's Scary Farm is recognized as the very first theme park Halloween event, so I could just wrap up the episode here with a simple, and other theme parks follow Knott's lead, and that's how we got all the events at theme parks today. Of course, there is more to the story, so let's get into that. Sinister Seymour would headline Halloween Haunt again in 1974, but he passed away from stomach cancer in March of the following year. Knott's continued with the Halloween Haunt events, bringing in radio personality Wolfman Jack for 1975. In 1976, a show named Dead Man's Hanging premiered. It was a short show that ended with a cowboy being hanged for murder, but it would eventually evolve into a pop culture-based comedy horror show years later. There's an article on ultimatehaunt.com by Bob Verner that tells the story of how those live actors in the Pekins ended up on the streets of Ghost Town at Knott's. In 1977, a newly hired monster tried to get into his assigned Pekin location, but the door was padlocked and no one knew where the key was. So the employee was instructed to, quote, just kind of walk around and, scare people. So he did. The next day, more of the Pekin monsters were allowed to roam the streets, and Ghost Town became the world's first unofficial scare zone. By the end of the 1980s, the Pekins were decorated but no longer had live actors inside. The term scare zone wouldn't actually be coined until 1996 when Camp Snoopy was branded as the Gauntlet. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to explain that over time, the people in the monster costumes have become known as scare actors. There are auditions every year, and many people return yearly to perform their characters at haunts. One of the tools used to scare people are cans filled with coins, or nuts and bolts, or whatever loud metal items they can find. And they are shaken toward guests to surprise them with a loud sound. In Ted Doherty's book about Scary Farm, he explains that this tradition began with employees at Knott's taking a number 10 can, which is about 7 inches tall, and usually used for bulk canned foods, and they mounted a door handle to it and put some metal inside. That was the first sound effect at a haunt, and it was successful, but they eventually changed the design to use smaller soup cans and bought a can sealer from a local canning company to be able to seal the cans and make sure the sound was consistent. The first maze created for the event, not just repurposing the rooms from the haunted shack, was in 1977. It was named 10 Chilling Chambers. It was designed by Rick Campbell at the direction of Marion Knott. It was built inside Wilderness Dance Hall, and a second maze was added in 1979, Chamber of Horrors by Craig Nelson, which was added to the Fiesta Village area of the park. Wolfman Jack's last year at the haunt was 1980. In 1981, Dr. Demento and Weird Al Yankovic performed a show in the Wagon Camp. They weren't technically headlining the haunt, but they were mentioned on the flyer. In 1982, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, took over as the headliner, and mazes started to become more detail-oriented. That year, they also introduced a maze that was actually a maze, with turnarounds and dead ends for the first time. They would try that a few more times over the years, but it isn't really the norm for a maze at the haunts. In 1983, Bud Hurlbut sold the log ride and mine ride to the Knott family, and Bill Cook took over haunt redesigns and eventually took over control of Knott's Scary Farm. Before I continue on from Knott's, I want to point out that in 1985, scare actors began experimenting with sliding. The first sliders would scrape flattened soup cans on the floor to make noise as they ran and would slide toward guests, which originated looking more like a baseball player stealing a base. It wouldn't take long for a few test runs in Camp Snoopy and then in Ghost Town by scare actors named Todd Stubler, Bobby Albright, and Wade Gordon to evolve into many skilled people using knee, toe, and hand protection to scare people at Halloween events. Todd Stubler designed gloves with metal washers sewn onto them to scrape as he slid, and that has transformed into metal for scraping being built into the slider costumes. There is a great documentary named Sliders of Ghost Town that goes into more detail on how all of this developed. If you want to learn more about this, give it a watch. So, while all of this was happening at Knott's, the other theme parks in the country were definitely trying to figure out how to recreate this success at their locations. But before I get into more Halloween events, I do want to bring up Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey and their walk-through Haunted Castle attraction that was built in 1979. Okay, let me take a step back. A year earlier in 1978, Six Flags partnered with Tom's River Haunted House Company to install an attraction that was named simply Haunted House. This was a walk-through haunt attraction, complete with plywood walls and ceilings, foam molded decorations, some wax mannequins, and a few employees in costumes as various ghouls. All of this was housed in 4 connected over-the-road aluminum trailers, which that company decorated offsite and then installed at the park. Great Adventure had planned on this just being a limited-time attraction, and it was. The Haunted House attraction was moved to Six Flags Over Mid-America in 1979, where it ran for 3 more years. But the attraction was popular in Great Adventure, so they actually had Tom's River Haunted House Company build a larger version of the walkthrough, and that was Haunted Castle. Okay, so to be clear, there were other haunted houses like this across the country, and even others in New Jersey, but I'm bringing this specific haunted castle up because there was a tragic event that happened there that resulted in big changes in the way haunts are created today. At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned that we will be going over some real deaths, and that I will warn you before we get into the details, so this is your warning. I won't be too graphic, but I will explain the circumstances and the changes it caused. So if you want to skip ahead about 2 minutes, go ahead. Okay, for those of you still here, on May 11th, 1984, There were roughly 29 people inside the Haunted Castle attraction when reportedly, around 6:30 p.m., a 14-year-old boy was using a cigarette lighter to find his way through a room. He accidentally walked into a section of polyurethane foam padding that was covering a wall, and it caught on fire. The report continues that he tried to put it out, unsuccessfully, but then continued through the castle without notifying anyone about what had happened. The majority of the other guests in the attraction noticed the smoke and ran out, but a group of 8 teenagers between 15 and 19 years old who were at the park on a field trip did not make it out alive. According to an article on the NFPA website, that's the National Fire Protection Association, they died of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. That article also points out that flashover, the point where everything was engulfed in flames, took about 3.5 minutes. Apparently, almost everything that was used to construct that attraction was flammable. 4 months after the fire, Great Adventure Inc., its parent company Six Flags Corporation, and Bally Manufacturing Corporation, then owners of Six Flags, along with 2 of the park's managers, were charged with aggravated manslaughter. There was an 8-week trial with 13 hours of deliberation, but in the end, the jury found the defendants not guilty. But they weren't exactly off the hook either. They paid millions of dollars in civil penalties and spent over $5 million updating their other attractions to prevent the same situation from occurring ever again. Many changes were made to the NFPA 101 Life Safety Code, including a new section about special provisions for special amusement buildings. This required amusement buildings to be protected by an automatic sprinkler system, including on portable or movable buildings. It also required that if an attraction had low lighting levels, it needed to be equipped with a smoke detection system that would sound an alarm in a nearby location that was constantly attended. And the lights would have to come on to point you toward the nearest exit, and any conflicting sounds or visuals would need to be silenced and turned off. Those rules have been expanded on since they were put in place, but they're the baseline for safety in haunts and all other theme park attractions that are still followed today. Temporary haunts at theme parks have several exits and points of egress along the path, as well as these features. But Haunted Castle wasn't a Halloween attraction. It was open all year long, similar to Disney's Haunted Mansion. It wasn't until 1986 that theme parks other than Knott's officially started creating their own Halloween events. That year, Universal Studios Hollywood held their first Halloween Horror Nights, and Six Flags Astroworld officially premiered what they called Fright Nights. The Universal event took place over 2 nights, Friday Halloween night and Saturday November 1st. The event did not include any haunted houses, but it did have a live concert by R&B band Ready for the World, fresh off their platinum self-titled debut album, which included Billboard #1 hit Oh Sheila from 1985. There was also a laser show, a monster magic show, and more. But the main attraction was the Terror Tram. Keep in mind that back in 1986, the Universal Park in Hollywood was still advertising itself as Universal Studios Tour. Now, I'm about to explain the occurrence of the first and maybe only theme park death related to a Halloween event. So this is your warning. If you don't want to hear about this, fast forward again by about 2 minutes. Okay, so the Terror Tram attraction that first year featured many monsters and scenes where they would, quote, attack the tram. Sadly, the first night of the event, a 20-year-old park employee named Paul Ribaldi leaped from a park tram filled with mannequins dressed like corpses to scare guests on a tram, but got trapped between the 3rd and 4th sections of the tram and was, quote, run over and dragged approximately 100 feet, according to the Sheriff's Department, as quoted in a November 2nd LA Times article. He was pronounced dead around 9 p.m. To be clear, Paul was doing his job that night. He was in costume and his job was to scare people on the tram, and what happened was an accident. He had been working for Universal in retail, selling toys and films since May of that year. That article quotes John Bullard, then publicity director for Universal Studios, as saying, "It's not unusual. We have a lot of volunteer people working on the Halloween event. There is no skill involved in what he did." There were also quotes from coworkers who described him as one of the sweetest kids and the kind of guy that always walks around with a smile on his face. That article also mentioned that Bullard admitted that the company expected to lose money on the weekend venture. Universal Studios still held the Saturday event, but would not try to hold another Halloween Horror Nights event until 1992. But that event also wasn't successful. In 1991, Universal Studios Florida premiered Fright Nights, which they renamed to Halloween Horror Nights in 1992. A quick note on Fright Nights. Jay Stein, the then president of Universal, wanted an after-hours Halloween event similar to how Disney had been running their Very Merry Christmas Party since 1985. So he worked with Julie Zimmerman to get the event running. The only haunted house they had that first year was the Dungeon of Terror that was put into the Jaws queue because that ride wasn't running that year because of technical issues. They also had a show named Chainsaw Massacre in 1991 that led to the development of the Chainsaw Drill Team, which debuted in Orlando in 1993. Scare actors with chainsaws are still prominent at many Halloween events, but yeah, those Florida events were profitable and have continued every year except for 2020 when all of these events were paused for the COVID-19 pandemic. The event came back to Hollywood from 1997 to 2000, but was skipped again until 2006. But they have been running every Halloween season since then, again except for 2020. These days, Halloween Horror Nights has also expanded across the Pacific Ocean with events held in Universal Studios Japan and Singapore as of 2008 and 2011, respectively. Now, back to 1986. Over at Six Flags Astroworld, a theme park that operated in Houston, Texas from 1968 until 2005, debuted their own Fright Nights event. This was held for 5 nights, including the weekends before and after Halloween, plus Halloween Day, which, again, fell on a Friday that year. Much like Six Flags Fright Fest today, this event was not a separate ticket event. It was included with regular park admission and available to season pass holders. It had attractions for children during the day, like face painting and trick-or-treating, but also included attractions named Sanctuary of Strangeness, Magical Spirit Cabinet, and River of Blood. It was renamed Fright Fest in 1992, and the event was successful enough because it went on to run annually every Halloween season until 2005, which included the very last day the park was open. The concept for Fright Nights and later Fright Fest were copied at Six Flags Over Georgia in 1987, Six Flags Over Texas, and Six Flags Over Mid-America, which is now Six Flags St. Louis, in 1988, Frontier City in 1989, Six Flags Great America in 1991, Great Adventure in 1992, Magic Mountain in 1993, Fiesta Texas in 1996, Darien Lake in 1998, Six Flags America, which is closing permanently in a few days after this podcast airs, and Six Flags Marine World, now known as Discovery Kingdom, Lich Gardens, which is no longer a Six Flags park, and Great Escape in 1999. Six Flags New England and Worlds of Adventure in 2000, La Ronde, located in Quebec, Canada in 2002, and finally Six Flags Mexico in 2012. Meanwhile, over at the Legacy Cedar Fair Parks, their Halloween events appear to coincide with the company purchasing Knott's Berry Farm in 1997. Cedar Point celebrated Hallow-Weekends for the first time in October of 1997, a few months before the purchase of Knott's was finalized in December of that year. The first year, it had 2 haunted houses and a spooky train ride. The following year, Hallow-Weekends premiered at Dorney Park and Valley Fair. Worlds of Fun started their own version in 1999. In 2001, Valley Fair's Halloween event went on hiatus, restarting as Valley Scare from 2006 to 2021, and then return to Valley Scare again in 2024. Besides Valley Scare, the other parks mentioned would eventually change the names of their events to Halloween Haunt, except for Cedar Point, which still uses the Hallow-Weekend moniker. Carowinds started their Scarowinds Halloween events in 2000, the same year that Kings Island started running Fear Fest, back when the parks were still owned by Paramount. Kings Dominion started their own Fear Fest in 2001, followed by Canada's Wonderland in 2005. After Cedar Fair purchased these former Paramount parks, the events changed their names to Halloween Haunt, except for Carowinds that kept the Scarowinds name, though for a while it was referred to as Scarowinds Halloween Haunt. California's Great America in Santa Clara, California didn't have their own Halloween Haunt until 2008, but it stopped running there in 2021. And that brings us to Howl-O-Scream, the Halloween event found at 5 United Parks properties around the country. The SeaWorld Park in Abu Dhabi has Spooky Season, that's SEA-SON, it's a SeaWorld thing, during this time of year, but it's more of a family-friendly celebration of Halloween with trick-or-treating and less scares. But here in the US, we have Howl-O-Scream, which is a nighttime separate ticket event that takes place at all of the Busch Gardens and SeaWorld parks over here. It started with Busch Gardens Williamsburg in 1999. That year, Busch Gardens Tampa Bay had an event named Spooky Safari that was focused on family fun with only a few scares, but they rebranded it into Howl-O-Scream the next year in 2000. 1 year later, SeaWorld San Antonio debuted their version of the event in 2001. 2008, the other SeaWorld parks added daytime Halloween experiences, but it wasn't until 2021 that the SeaWorlds in Orlando and San Diego would try their hands at Howl-O-Scream as well. Today, these events are still going strong at the majority of theme parks across the country, running anywhere from late August to early November. The spirit of fear and excitement during the Halloween season is still felt at these parks, and if you haven't experienced one of these, we recommend at least trying it once to see it for yourself. Sometimes the advertisements make the events out to be much more scary than they are in person, which if you're like us at Where in the Park, you can go there and just appreciate the amount of work put into the immersive environments and the care put into the costumes and decor regardless of the scares. If you have any photos or stories about your experiences at any of these events, please join us on our private Facebook group, Where in the Park Explorers. We would love to learn about how you have enjoyed these events over the years. And well, that wraps up this episode. If you've had a good time and or learned something new, please leave us a 5-star review and like and subscribe and all the positive things whatever platform you're listening to us on lets you do. And well, until next time, we'll see you somewhere in the park.
Thanks for exploring with us today. If you have enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and review, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and don't forget to check out the accompanying photos at whereinthepark.com/podcast. Do you have a park detail that you'd like to learn more about? Please share it with us on our private Facebook group, Where in the Park Explorers. Until next time, we'll see you somewhere in the park.